Good morning. It's great to gather together on the Sabbath, a day that the Lord has set aside for us to grow in our relationship with Him and, I believe, our fellow members. I don't know if you noticed the title in the bulletin. It said, God's will, my will, question mark. And I struggled with that a bit because, see, I put the messages on the sign, and some of the pastors get lines that are too long to put on the sign. And then I thought, is it God's will, my will, or my will, God's will? Or am I trying to make my life to conform to God's will, or am I trying to take my life, God, to conform to what I want? And there's a difference there, if you think about it. So, I'm going to, one of the things that is, my background, I'm a teacher, and teachers get to ask questions, and up here I don't think I get to ask as many questions. But my background is a bit that I was a middle school and high school teacher, and then a junior academy and academy principal. And when I went to retire, I was department chair at Andrews with the teaching education program and associate dean. So I've been around kids for a long time. Even before I graduated, I taught swimming at summer camps. And you know, it's interesting to hear what young people are told. And the same applies to all of us, I think. Have you ever heard the phrase, you can be anything you want to be? Yeah. And then I looked up some quotes here that I've heard, and I wanted to get them a little better. You can be anything you want to be if you only believe with sufficient conviction and act in accordance with your faith. For whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. That sounds pretty powerful. As real as your imagination and as close as your dream, believe in it, and what can be imagined can be achieved. Wow. So I've heard these things, and that bothers me because I don't believe it. Well, I sort of do. Can you become anything you want to become? So we're going to talk about three things today. And I'm only talking about people that claim to know God. Okay, the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Muslims and stuff aren't in this sermon today. But the first one, I can be anything I want to be, and I'm not going to let God get in the way. That doesn't sound very good, does it? I think I know what God wants me to do, and I'm going to do it my way. Or I can be anything that God wants me to be. Isn't that... Well, we're going to look at some examples from the Bible. One of the things that I found interesting, especially as working in the education department, was the number of people, students, that came in with their parents. Now, I understand these are college students, and their parents were telling them what they were going to do with their life. You're going to be a teacher. It's a good career. There's always a position open. And I would say to my students many times, you know, I don't want you to be a teacher if you don't feel a calling to be a teacher. We don't just need people that know this stuff. We need people that know what God wants them to be and lead out in that. And so the first person, it might seem a strange one to look at, is Balaam. I'm going to ask you to look. One of the advantages of being a teacher is I knew exactly how long I was going to have. And you don't know that here. So I'm going to start in Numbers 22, verses 5 to 7. And this is going to be a lot of it, the Lee Davidson paraphrase, as we go through there. But you see, Balak, the king of Moab, had watched what the people of Israel had just done to the, who was it? It's a coincidence. This falls with the Sabbath school lesson that goes on Exodus. The Amorites, they had just defeated them. And they looked out there at this crowd of people and said, we've got trouble. It's coming. We've got to do something. And so I think, in my imagination, somebody in his council said, there's this Balaam guy over there by the Euphrates River, and when he curses somebody, they're cursed. And when he blesses somebody, they're blessed. So let's go get him to come and curse these people, and if they're cursed, maybe we have a chance. And so in verse 7 of 22, it says, so the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with this is a key phrase, the fee for divination in their hands, and they came to Balaam and reported to him the words of Balak. I don't know how the telegraph system operated back then, but I suspect that Balaam heard they were coming before they got there. Somehow this always works. I don't know how that happens. And so somebody's knocking on his door, and they say, you Balaam? Yes, we have heard great things about you. You bless people and they're blessed. You curse people and they're cursed. And look, we have a bag of money, the rewards of divination. And if you will come with us and curse these people, you can have this riches. And Balaam, now it's interesting when you look up Balaam, some sources say he was a pagan soothsayer. But you read Mrs. White and it says he had known the Lord. And that's always a bad phrase there, the past tense. Not that he knew the Lord, but he had known them. And so he says, well, spend the night, I've got to go talk to the Lord. Verse 8, stay here tonight, I will bring back to you whatever word the Lord may speak to me. So the princes of Moab stayed with Balaam. Verse 12, but God said to Balaam, you must not go. You must not go with them. You must not curse the people, for they are blessed. So he got up and told them that. But somehow I think that he wasn't very convincing. And those elders of Midian and Moab says, he's telling us that, but he really wants more money. And so they go back there and they tell the king that. And they come back again. And so verse 15, they sent again the princes. And they came, and I'll just skip through here. They came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not let anything hinder you from coming, for I will honor you greatly. And whatever you tell me, I will do. So come, put a curse. And Balaam replied, he's got the right words, doesn't he? Even if Balak would give me his palace full of silver and gold, I could not trespass the commandments of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now, this is what I find interesting. He is claiming to speak for God, and that gives God permission to talk to him. And so God came to Balaam that night in verse 20. If the men come for you in the morning, you can go with them. And of course, we know the story. The men didn't come. They left. They gave up on this guy. He was going to keep talking to Jehovah, his God, and they already knew what God had said. So they left. And Balaam saw his reward of divination had left. So he gets on his donkey, and we know the story. The donkey talked to him, and finally God gives him permission, but only to speak what God told him to do. And so he went on his way, and he went there, and he got to Balak, and he was making progress maybe. He thought he was on his way. So what happened? You all know the story, don't you? He got up there and he looked out over Balak says, look at this multitude of people. And so Balak says, well, make some offerings. You remember how many? Anybody? Lots of offerings. I think 7 altars, 7 a bull and just lots of stuff. And then he gets up there and he blesses the people. Whew. How did that make Balak feel? What have I done? I want them cursed, and here they are being blessed. But Balaam, as patriarchs and prophets says, was determined to receive the reward. So in talking to Balak, he says, well, okay, maybe if we go over here and we don't get to see the whole group, we just get to look at the small group, maybe you can bless them. Balak didn't give up, and I don't know what Balaam was thinking. Do you know how many times they tried to curse little different pieces of the Israelite army? People? 5 times. And it was a failure all the time. But if you look in Numbers 23, verse 10, you see that Balaam had a wish. In one of his pronouncements, he said, let me die the death of the upright, and let the end of my life be like theirs. What do we know about the end of Balaam? We don't hear that. I haven't heard a sermon about Balaam. I can't remember when. If you look at Numbers 31:8, jumping way ahead there. Numbers 31:8. Let me get it here. The end of it all, they killed the kings of Midian in addition to those slain, and it gives a whole bunch of names, 5 Midianite kings. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. Now, how did Balaam get into the situation? He had been blessing the people. He went back home. How did he end up being killed? We see he went home and he sat there and says, boy, I missed out on that. I'm just going to call it the bag of money. What can I do? And he says, I know why the Israelites are blessed. It's because they serve Jehovah, the God he claimed to serve. And as long as they serve Jehovah, there is no chance of them being cursed. So he went back to Balak and he came up with a plan where they would have wild pagan parties. They would send the women into the camp and they would get the people to sin. And once they sinned, then the curses could take effect. Oh, a guy that said he served Jehovah, but he didn't really want God to get in the way. Do we ever do that? I hope not. But we want to something so bad that we know what God says, but we just are determined to do it our own way. And it's amazing how many times that is mentioned. In Joshua 13:22, it says the Israelites killed Balaam, the Omen reader, along with others. 2 Peter 2:15, by forsaking the right path, they have gone astray because they followed the way of Balaam, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. Even in Jude, it ends up talking about, woe to them, for they traveled down Cain's path, and because the greed have abandoned themselves to Balaam's error, they will certainly perish in Korah's rebellion. It seems like there was an awful lot of time spent in talking about Balaam for the minor person that he probably was in that kingdom. So now, do we want to tell our children you can become anything you want to be? I hope not. You know, and I think of that in my own life. I started out to be a dentist. Now, I have nothing against dentistry, okay? If you're a dentist, this is not speaking against you. But I wanted to be a dentist because I had an uncle who was an orthodontist, who had the big house with the swimming pool and the boat and the 2 mountain cabins. And that looked pretty good to me. I'm going to be a dentist. Now, if somebody's called to be a dentist, more power to them. If God calls you, I said 2 things. I don't want to look in people's mouths all my life. And I felt God calling me a different way. So between my freshman and sophomore year, I decided I would be a teacher. Now, I knew a little bit about teaching. My mother was a teacher, my dad was a teacher, my grandma was a teacher. I had taught swimming for not at that point, I hadn't taught 5 years. But I knew kids, I had worked with them. And I says, I'm going to follow and be a teacher. And you know, I haven't been disappointed with that. I think that was God's calling for me. I have seen lives of young people changed. In fact, I know that they're in this audience, most Sabbath students have been in my class. So now let's take a look at another example. Moses. Here we have been studying him. We know he was the miracle baby, pulled out of the river. How long was he raised with his mother? 12 years. And then he went to the court of the king and he got the best education that I can imagine was available. There are theories that during that time, I like archaeology and studying all this stuff. It appears that maybe he led Egypt's armies at least once. He knew what he was doing, and from that 12 years at home, he had heard about God's promise. He was the miracle baby. He might have said, maybe you're the person that's going to set Israel free. And so he was out walking one day among his people, and what happened? He saw a fight going on, a disagreement, and so he just took care of it. He killed the Egyptian. And I think he thought that the Israelites would rise up and with him and revolt. There were lots of them, remember? 1 or 2 million that would revolt against the king of Egypt. But no, the next day when he came back and saw 2 Israelites fighting, they said, who made you ruler over us? And so we know the story, and we know that Pharaoh found out about it, or he was afraid that Pharaoh was going to find out about it, and so he fled. So he had done what he believed God wanted him to do, but in his own power. He didn't stop and say, God, how is it that you want me to do this? And Hebrews 11:25 and 26 says he chose to be on God's side rather than on royalty. So there we go. Somebody doing what they thought was God's will. They weren't trying to get in the way of God's will. They were doing God's will, I put that in quotes, doing God's will their way. So if we go to Exodus 3, I believe it is, we find Moses at the burning bush. Moses at the burning bush. The bush was not burning up. And so, are you a curious sort of person like I am? If you're out in the desert and the bush is on fire, you got to check it out. So he did. And at verse 4 of chapter 3, when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Now, in my mind, my imagination, we meet Moses, and here God is. He's saying, I want you to go and let the people go. And I can imagine Moses saying, he's been out in the desert 40 years. God, what took you so long? I've been waiting for you to call me to do my task that you assigned me. But what has happened in those 40 years? He came to realize maybe that he wasn't the big military leader that he thought he was. And here God was saying, go back there and let my people go. And so we don't find Moses saying, here I am. What do you want me to do? How are you sending me? In verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, or that I should bring Israelites out of Egypt? Good question. Who am I? I'm just a shepherd. I've been following sheep around for 40 years. I've got a house here. I've got, maybe a tent. I've got family. And verse 12, he replied, that's God, surely I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, they will serve God on this mountain. Verse 13, the reluctant Moses. If I go to the Israelites and tell them that God your Father has sent me to you, they ask, what is his name? What should I say? I am that I am. And you must say this to the Israelites. He gave them the whole instructions. Go and bring together the elders of Israel, and what I have promised, I will bring you out of affliction. Verse 18, the elders will listen to you. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go. And so he says, I will perform many wonders. And we know, it would be nice if I had a rod today that I could throw down on the ground and it turned into a snake. Not in my power. Not in Moses' power. So he got that sign. And then the leprosy? And it was cured. And verse 1 of the next chapter, chapter 4. Moses answered again, and if they do not believe me or pay attention to me, the Lord has not appeared to me. And that's when we get the rod being thrown down and all that. Then he comes up with another excuse. Here he's standing before God who said to go do it. And he says, I am not eloquent. God has an answer. I like verse 11. I think the Lord's getting a little agitated. The Lord said to him, who gave a mouth to man? Who makes a person mute or deaf or seen or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? So now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you must say. And so Moses with Aaron, they go and do Moses and Aaron let Israel go? Moses and Aaron, as the mouthpiece and agent of God, lead the people out. And that's what I think we need to be telling our young people. That when God, let me back up. This is what we need to believe as old people. When God asks you to do something, He's going to give you the power to do it. Have you thought of it that way? You know, there's all kinds of things we can do. Moses had gotten comfortable leading sheep. Have you gotten comfortable sitting there, listening each week to what is said, without getting out of your comfort zone? God pushed Moses way out of his comfort zone. But that's what it took for God to use Moses to let the Israelites free. And when you think about it, there were a lot of people in the Bible that went out and did great things who thought they weren't prepared. Think of Joseph. Think of Daniel. The disciples. What an unlikely group of people to go out and spread the gospel to the world. But they let God lead. And now that's why I'm always a bit suspicious of spiritual gifts tests. Because I believe God gives you the spiritual gift when you need it, not when you're sitting in the pew, in the chair here. So, you know, the nominating committee, they didn't ask me to say this. The DRC, the nominating committee, is coming up soon, and they're going to ask you to do some things. Hopefully, we're going to try to get everybody involved. But don't use the excuse, I don't have the ability. Because pray about it, and if God's really asking you to do it, He will give you the ability. You know, in Ephesians 4, it talks about all the gifts that God gives. And they're gifts. And a gift means I didn't earn it. I didn't deserve it. It was just, you know, He gave some to apostles. He gave some as teachers. He gave this whole list. He gave. And if people are willing to receive the gift, He is willing to give the gift and make you into I don't know that we can say a Moses, but He can certainly lead us, because the disciples, they weren't eloquent speakers. They were fishermen. And He used them to turn the world upside down. And so I think our most important thing is that we must let the Lord be Lord. The Lord should pervade every aspect of life, the Lord's leadership. Balaam is given so much coverage because he is an example of what not to do. So take time to study the examples of people who were truly and totally committed to live the life that God gave them, and pray that you may follow their examples. There's a phrase in your Bible, my Bible, 1 Corinthians 11:1. It always bothered me just a bit, but I've come to see, I think, what it means. Paul said, "Be ye followers of me as I am of Christ." And that, you know, are you safe to follow? That's not a good question, because somebody's following you whether you're safe to follow or not. So we need to make our lives so that we are safe to follow, because we are totally enclosed in God's love, and He is willing to make us what He wants us to become. So I say, let the Lord be Lord of your life.